Kate Milafalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And lately, people have been asking, how are we supposed to move forward in the world? And, why are we seeing everything that we're seeing? Why is it so painful? Why is it so hard? What can we do? And most responses seem hardly adequate. Sorry, that's my bird in the background. So I've been thinking of doing like a series of little presentations about philosophy because we're not unique and the human race has gone through many challenges in the past, and a lot of much smarter people than I have devised systems to cope with life and have tried to interpret and understand the meaning of reality. And we looked at the Cathars. They were an interesting group. And today I'd like to talk about philosophy. Now, philosophy, I have a troubled relationship with philosophy because I think they never use a simple term if they can use an obtuse term. And they never speak in simple sentences if they can tie a Gordian knot that is absolutely incomprehensible. And you find yourself, it's very much like trying to parse technology instructions on how to troubleshoot something. You have to look up every single word. It's just ridiculous, which is kind of what I did here. I had looked up a lot of things because I thought I knew what they meant. But, I studied biology. What did I know? I took the philosophy of love and friendship, and we made, this is a long time ago. This is what you call lightweight philosophy. We made slideshows with John Denver songs. I remember very well. So let's just say I wasn't a heavy-duty thinker about philosophy. And if you're like me, you probably have a conception in your mind of what a Stoic is. I always think of a Stoic as somebody kind of grim, who kind of enjoys suffering, kind of adjacent to a masochist. And that's really not at all the truth. And I was very surprised to find out. And I've been following a channel on YouTube about Stoicism. And the young man who does it, he's easy on the eye, so that makes it pleasant. But beyond that, it's been very informative. So let's talk a bit about Stoicism. Where are my glasses? And I think this might give us a little direction on how to cope in life, because it's a way of life, this philosophy. A lot of philosophy is just all airy, airhead, big thoughts, lots of big thoughts. This is much more practical. So Stoicism came from ancient Greek and ancient Greece and Rome. There was a place called the Agora in Athens where smart people would spout off. I guess maybe it was like the YouTube of ancient Greece, where people who wanted their thoughts to be heard would go and speak, and they would gather together subscribers who would hit the thumbs up, and they would come and sit and listen, and conversations were had, debates were engaged in. And there was a guy, this is 300 BCE, 300 BC, so 300 years before the birth of Christ. There was a guy called Zeno, Zeno of Citium, and I'm sure I didn't pronounce that properly. And he espoused these notions of Stoicism, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. But in general, Stoicism was about how to live a virtuous life in accordance with nature. Now we're sounding very New Agey. And that, I think, is what struck me, was how similar this belief system, this worldview is to the Hermetic principles, the laws of the universe, natural law, and New Age. Nothing new under the sun. So how to live a virtuous life in accordance with nature. The Stoics believe that virtue is necessary and sufficient to achieve happiness which was, as they defined it, a well-lived life. So notice what we're not talking about: position, power, money, beauty, wealth, adventure, entertainment, no foodies. So the Stoics practiced 4 cardinal virtues every day. And I think it's interesting, you might recognize some of these words and make an association, which I encourage you to do. Prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice. All in accordance with nature. And if you practice these 4 cardinal virtues every day in accordance with nature, you will have lived a well-lived life. Things of the world: health, wealth, pleasure. They're neither inherently good or bad, but they only have value as they serve as material for virtue to act upon. So what is he saying? He's saying, trust a philosopher to never make it clear. They're talking about the temptations of the world, the sins of the flesh, the pleasures of the earth. They're not good or bad. What they are is opportunities for growth, opportunities for lessons, and how you relate to them within the laws of the natural world determines, are you leading a good life, a virtuous life? Virtue is sufficient for happiness. And one of my very favorite books, because I find it so meaningful, actually echoes this in many ways. And I'm thinking I've done it before, and it's a small book, and I'm thinking maybe I should do it again. We should have a little discussion group about it. Is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, because he managed to find meaning and good in a concentration camp. So virtue is sufficient for happiness, and to practice this is to be resilient to misfortune. That's exactly what Man's Search for Meaning talks about. People should aim to maintain a will that is in accordance with nature. We're having a problem with that these days in our world. That's a large part that's contributing to what's going on, is we're not living up to that. Therefore, the best indication of a person's life philosophy is, now I believe this is Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou said, the best way to judge a person's life: how he behaves, not what he says. Nothing new under the sun. All of this stuff is ancient philosophy. Everything is rooted in nature. Now we discover, if you think about it, that the Stoics were also early plasma physicists. Keep that in mind. Everything is rooted in nature, and to have a good life, you have to understand the rules of the natural order, and everything is connected as one. There is one thing, the universe. We're all part of it. Essentially, that's plasma physics. Anyway, they emphasized ethics. Now, this is in a world at the time that had lesser emphasis on things like human dignity and the rights of man and such. So this was earth-shaking for them to talk about this. They emphasized ethics. It was important to the Stoics to develop self-control and fortitude as means of overcoming destructive emotions. What does that mean? Getting a grip on yourself, wallowing in jealousy, wanting revenge, being angry, craving Haagen-Dazs at 4 o'clock in the morning. The sins of the flesh. I mean, this is the universal belief throughout human history and around the planet. It's an echo. And we need to hear it from every source. Here's a new source echoing the same thing. We need to become clear and unbiased thinkers to understand universal reason. Most importantly, we need to improve the individual's ethic and moral well-being, his or her virtue. In interpersonal relationships, be free of anger, be free of envy, jealousy, greed. This was a really earth-shattering thing for anyone to say in this time period where it was written. Accept slaves as equals because all are the products of nature. That, people couldn't believe they said that. Human decisions create inevitable results. Now we're getting a little bit into the physics of it. This is the Hermetic principles. This is the law of polarity, the law of cause and effect, the law of rhythm. You're going to see the Venn diagram between these. This is why philosophy was considered a science. Philosophy and arithmetic were on a par, and you couldn't be an educated person and a great thinker without understanding philosophy as much as you understood Pythagoras. So I guess we know where that leaves me. But anyway, human decisions create inevitable results. That we're all connected. We're all connected to nature. It's all one. And they're talking cause and effect. So this concept is called determinism. And I had to look determinism up. I thought I knew what it meant, and I didn't 100%. So it's very complicated because people make it complicated. There are pages of resources debating the pros and cons of determinism and this kind of determinism and that kind of determinism. It's hotly debated, but for our purposes, it's not incompatible with the idea of free will. So we're not saying everything's determined and you can't change anything. We're not saying that. This is more, think of it more as, a later version of this would be to think of an autonomous individual in a rigidly deterministic universe. So laws of physics can't be changed. The laws of physics are what the laws of physics are. They call it the laws of nature, natural law. Those laws are already set in stone and cannot be changed, but we have free will. And these laws are not incompatible with free will. We can't change those laws, but we can decide what we're going to do in the context of nature. That's what they meant. Think of an individual in a rigidly determined universe. This eventually became known as classical pantheism. So I had to look that up. And classical pantheism is like a modern term for this ancient Stoic belief system. And it's what was espoused by Spinoza. And if you had to put it into a phrase to define it, you would say, all is God. So everything is coming from the source. Now we're starting to use terminology that we are more familiar with. So to become a Stoic is to endorse the truthfulness of its worldview and to accept its prescription for how you ought to live, not just to like what's going on and like how it makes you feel. That's not important in the eyes of Stoic. This is where we get the notion that Stoics are grim and masochistic. No, they're not trying to change nature. They're not trying to make the world what it isn't. They're trying to learn acceptance. And now we're starting to sound like Zen Buddhism. It's all connected. It kind of makes your third eye hurt, you know. Anyway, the word Stoic comes from stoa poikili. I know nothing about ancient Greece, so who knows how it's really pronounced. But what those two words mean is painted porch. The stoa was a portico. So it's an open hallway that's open with columns. The air can go through. There's the agora, like the forum, this open area, and this four-sided walkway, breezeway called a portico, and it was called the painted porch. And in the agora of Athens, this is where Zeno sat with his students students and people who like to trade ideas with him and discuss things in the 4th century BC. And because it was called the painted porch, the Stoa, people who followed him became Stoics. Originally, it was called Zenoism, maybe Zenoism, but they changed this because, and they changed it, the early Stoics themselves changed it intentionally because they did not want to start a cult of personality. So apparently they were way smarter than we are. Zeno was a follower of disciples who went back all the way to Socrates. So direct descendant of the teachings of Socrates. Stoicism became the most popular philosophy of the educated elite in the Hellenistic world and in the Roman Empire. So the Greeks and the Romans, who considered themselves elite and educated, were big proponents of Stoicism. So I'll give you a couple of names that should ring a bell, maybe. Seneca Falls, named after him, and Epictetus. He was a slave who was a Stoic. And then Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, and he was a Stoic. And he's a fascinating person. You think of a Roman emperor, you think of Nero, you think of Caligula, you think of Commodus, you think of Constantine, you think of these people who are pathological. They're psychopaths, they don't care about anybody. They are completely narcissistic, power hungry, self-indulgent, dismissive of anybody who's not elite. And, we could go on. It's starting to sound too familiar. And then you get Marcus Aurelius, who was referred to as the last of the 5 good emperors. And we're going to talk a little bit about him because I find him really interesting. So the Stoics, just to summarize, they espouse logic. They are all about, another big word, monistic physics. And this is, quantum physics. All is one. Everything is connected. We're all part of a whole. The universe is one, and we're just part of it functioning. And then they believed in naturalistic ethics. This is natural laws. You cannot fight the laws of nature, principles of nature. They're in operation in the universe at all times, and they're immutable. So this is the part that I imagine some people will dig their heels in about this, and I'm not saying you have to believe this. I don't know how I feel about it. Although I will say this, there's a phrase we're all familiar with. Everything is magic until we understand the science of it, and then suddenly it's no longer magic. So Nostradamus healed people, and nobody could understand what he was up to. Now people accept the concept of Reiki healing. He did that. So just to put it a little tiny bit of perspective. So I'm on the topic of all the phenomena in the universe. All are caused by natural law and are not transcendent. There's no such thing as the mystical and the, okay, calm down. What they're saying is they're not denying that any of that exists. Spirit, ghosts, elevated beings, healing, all the stuff. They're not denying it exists. They're just saying we don't understand it because there's natural law operates there, and we just don't have the knowledge yet. We will, and we're getting there, but there's nothing mystical or woo-woo about any of it. It's completely intelligible and understandable if you had the knowledge and the brain power. And we're working on it. We're working on it right here, right now. So What's most important in life, all that other stuff is fun to think about and fun to argue about and to wonder. But let's bring this back down to reality. And what's really most important is what they called a well-reasoned life, to have self-control over your destructive emotions, to have clear, unbiased thinking, and virtue, to align your will with the laws of nature. So let's talk about Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors, was born April 26th in the year 121. He was a Taurus. So, you get this image of a practical kind of down-to-earth sort of guy. He was born in Rome, and he came from what's called the Nerva Antonine dynasty. So when you look him up, you just get pages of his background and who he derived from and who they all were and all the famous emperors and the dynastic battles. And it's just way too much. So I brought it down to reality. He's related to the good emperors Trajan and Hadrian. Now, good is relative, so don't freak out. He became heir to the throne. This is sort of a soap opera here. His uncle was adopted by the Emperor Hadrian, and that made him, the uncle, heir to the throne. And then the uncle adopted Marcus Aurelius, because really this was all about getting Marcus Aurelius situated to take over because he was a good person. So they maneuvered him into the inheritance of the throne, and it worked out. I mean, there's all this. Hadrian led a dissolute end of life and was in terrible shape. I get the impression that he intentionally partied himself to death. Almost sounded like depression, but happy to be rid of it, happy to hand it over to Marcus Aurelius's uncle. And this is all about family lines and associations and who was your patron and who was your patria potestis, all of this stuff. And we don't need to go into it. Suffice it to say that Marcus Aurelius was maneuvered into line, become emperor, but as a result, he had to break up his engagement to some other young woman, and he was betrothed and then married to his cousin, who was now essentially his sister legally, cousin by blood, sister by law. This was common. They were married. Her name was Faustina. And some descriptions of what happened as he was emperor, for example, there was a lot of war. And this is not a lot of war because he was a warrior. He wasn't all that into it, but it was kind of what he inherited. So there was what they was called the Parthian War. The Parthian War was actually a number of struggles against Germanic tribes, against the Armenians, against the Mesopotamians. So, the Roman Empire, they're fighting everybody everywhere. There was also an increased amount of Christian persecution during his time, but he was actually honored by famous Christians and was not blamed for it. This was kind of out of his hands, I guess. I didn't fully understand. The article I read didn't go into great detail, and it's not all that important. I think the point it was trying to make was that Marcus Aurelius was not any kind of a religious zealot at all. He didn't have a huge grudge against anybody. He was busy trying to be a good Stoic. So nobody held him responsible for it. Then, during his reign, there was the Antonine Plague. Now, this killed 5 to 10 million people. It's hard to get hard facts. It's been a while. It's often called the Galen Plague, the Plague of Galen. And I remember reading a book about Galen when I was a kid. Galen was a Greek doctor and philosopher who actually helped to establish things like physiology and anatomy, and all sorts of medical science were basically described and created by him. Of course, they believed in the four humors and, collar and, however, he was more scientific than anybody had been before him. And his beliefs about medicine and philosophy were hugely influential for the next 1300 years. So Galen, Galen, he was a big shot. They named the plague after him, not because he caused it, but because he was, I guess, I don't know, the Dr. Fauci of the Antonine Plague. Anyway, nobody knows for sure what this terrible thing was that happened in the late 100s. Was it possibly brought by soldiers from the Middle East who were fighting in Mesopotamia? They didn't know. Was it smallpox? Was it measles? Today, modern geneticists have studied it, and they still can't really identify it. They don't have the genetic evidence to say what it was, and descriptions, they can't go by descriptions because these diseases change over time. So Marcus Aurelius was succeeded by his son Commodus, and he was a piece of work. Let's talk about Marcus Aurelius as a young person. So now we know a little bit about very little about the course of his empire, his emperorship. He was extremely wealthy. I don't remember where the money came from. I read about it. I want to say mines, but I can't remember. Extremely wealthy, and his mother inherited enormous wealth. And so the way that the Romans raised their children, their sons were raised for power and position. And so the women didn't raise the children, the boys. The boys were put under the wing of a patron or an uncle or an adoptive father. Even if your father was alive, it was all about arranged relationships for more power and more influence. And he was described from his youth as an unusual kid. Excuse me. He was respectful to adults. He wasn't a little, know-it-all. He was thrifty, which was unusual because he was so wealthy. Not crazy thrifty, but he wasn't profligate. He was careful of his possessions, enough that people went, oh, look, he takes care of that. He doesn't just burn through more stuff. He reminded himself as a young adult, and he finally got the title of Caesar. Now, I should have brought my book upstairs. He is famous for a lot of different things that he wrote, but the most important, in my opinion, is this book he wrote called Meditations. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And they were never meant to be read. They were private diary. Every day, this is a Stoic thing. You might think about this. I think it's actually useful. They kept a diary. And every day when they got up, they would think about, what can I do today to improve? What can I do of good? And what can I do to fix something about myself? And they would contemplate it and write it down. And then that night they'd sit down again and they'd say, well, today I had these good things and not so good things. I succeeded and I didn't succeed, and I achieved my goals and I could have done better. And he did a lot of musing in writing called the Meditations. Nobody else was supposed to ever read it, but that's how we know a lot about Stoicism. So in his Meditations, he reminded himself after he became Caesar, quote, I see that you do not, I'm sorry, not I can't read my handwriting. He's talking to himself, okay? See that you do not turn into a Caesar. Do not be dipped into the purple dye, for that can happen. And the purple dye, of course, we've talked about this, is the rare purple dye of the nobility. He didn't want to live in the palace. He was very unhappy that as the emperor, he had to live in this big old palace. He didn't want to be part of a court, lords and senators and hangers on. He really wanted to lead an ethical life. In his meditations, he talks about that a lot. This is a quote: "Where life is possible, then it's possible to live the right life. Life is possible in a palace, so it is possible to live the right life in a palace." But he found it difficult. Once again, this reminds me of Viktor Frankl in this weird way. He actually was never very healthy. He had a lot of medical issues. I didn't delve into what they were, but he had a lot of illnesses. But he never let that interfere with his duties. He did the job he was supposed to do. There was one quote about him saying, I can't, I'm so exhausted. I just had to write 30 letters today. So got bogged down in his emails. He and his wife, Faustina, his cousin sister wife, she had 13 children over 23 years, including 2 sets of twins. And then I read elsewhere that she had 14 children in 30 years. And their first child was a girl, and she died around the age of 4. Her name was Domitia. The second pregnancy was a set of twin boys, but they died right away, and they didn't die at the same time. And he talked about this a little bit, which is unusual for a man to talk about this. They eventually he ended up, when he died, he had 1 son and 4 daughters who survived out of 14 children with his wife, and he had others. They said there were numerous others that just didn't, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, this is what he said about that. He said, "One man prays, 'How may I not lose my child?' But you, as a Stoic, must pray, 'How I may not be afraid to lose him.'" So it's that detachment from things of the world. He quoted from the Iliad about the loss of his children. "Leaves. The wind scattered some on the face of the ground. Like unto them are the children of men." So that's Marcus Aurelius, the example, probably the best example of a Stoic, because we know a lot about his personal thoughts. And I will continue on this topic if you're interested. I have other sources and I can tell you more. Or if there's a philosophical point of view that you feel has been helpful, let me know. We'll talk about it. So that's the Cathars and the Stoics. Who's next? Thank you very much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. And I truly appreciate everybody who's joined as a member. You guys get all the good stuff. So, slán go fóill, slánte.